respect it. So we have 4 sessions. The first session today will be on sustainable development and climate change, which will be moderated by Dr. Ruth Kagia. We shall have presentations from Julius Edward Salema from Tanzania. Mr. Salema, Dr. Salema, are you around? Oh, great. Okay, then we'll have a presentation from Regan Mugume and Enoch Bulime from Uganda. Regan, you're around? Oh, thank you. Then we'll have a presentation from Dr. Frederick Koka of Moi University and another presentation from Godwill Mongari. Then Professor Ogara will give the expert reflections. Professor Ogara, are you around? Oh, great. Thank you. Then our next session will be on technology, research, and climate change. And when you go through the program, you will be able to see the presenters. The session will be moderated by Dr. Grace Njoroge. We'll have presentations from Colonel Dr. James Kimuyu of NDUK, Dr. Mumo Nzau, Dr. Weston Shilaho, Dr. Jacinta Mwaweu. Our session 7 will be on technology, research, and climate change, which will be moderated by, no, it will still be the session on technology, research, and climate change will still have Dr. Engineer Joseph Kibere, the nexus between renewable energy, climate change, and security. Our former PS, are you around? Okay. Then we'll have a virtual presentation by Dr. Achime Udon of the National Maritime Foundation of India and reflections from Professor XN Iraki. The last session will be on climate change, armed conflict in Eastern Africa, which will be moderated by Dr. Susan Mwangi. We'll have Alice Keru, Dr. Anwar Abdi Fatah Bashir from Somalia, and we'll have Brian Muchema and Major Dr. Cliff Obogi, as well as Emily Masawa giving their presentations. Expert reflections will be given by our retired Inspector General, Joseph Boynet. As we begin, I take this opportunity to call upon Dr. Ruth Kagia, our moderator today, to take us through our first session on sustainable development and climate change. Welcome, Doc.
Good morning. Good morning. Didn't you get a cup of coffee or tea? Good morning. It's good to see all of you this morning. As we had the discussion yesterday, what became clear is just how fundamental the impact of climate change are on all facets of our lives. And as Ambassador Monica Juma indicated, it's sort of a crisis that is becoming greater by the day. The metaphor that she quoted from the Secretary General, that from climate global warming to climate boiling, in a sense, is almost a metaphor of how intense the challenge is. This morning, for this first segment, we're going to look at 2 elements to climate change. One, the impact of climate change on both the oceanic and the terrestrial, the land and the sea, that will be presented by Okaka and Salema. Salema is a marine scientist, looking at how is climate change impacting our land and sea. And then a couple more presentations by Mugare and Mugume on what are the ramifications of that on financing. What kind of financing do you require? How do we package that financing? So without further ado, because those four presenters have been introduced, I'd like to invite them to come to the front here so that I'm sure they're here. If the four of you could come here, Salema, Muguma, Kaka, Mongare, and as they're coming up, then you have a commentary by an expert, Professor Ogara. What is interesting about this panel is how diverse it is, from financing to veterinary medicine, Professor Ogara, to marine science and so on, which is the nature of the beast. You need to think multidimensionally, multi-sectorally. So without further ado, let me invite you, Salema, to kick off, and I'll be quite strict, 10 minutes, no more, no less. Over to you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Julius Edward from Tanzania. I'll be taking through the perception and livelihood vulnerability of coastal communities to changes in reef resource stressors, a case of Mafia Island in Tanzania. We all know that the coral reefs are the major areas in the marine environment which all the marine organisms feed, like mostly fish. They feed, they breed, and they are the nesting places. So as we see on the pictures on the slide, I don't know if the slides are seen. Can you show the slides, please? Okay, I can continue. Yeah, the problem of this study was what are the major coral reef threats. One of the major coral reef threats is sea level rise. Sea level rise is that can cause the increase in sedimentation which inundate the coral reefs. Because you know coral reefs, they are animals and they respire. So the sedimentations clog the respiratory systems. And the other major threat is ocean acidification. This is the increase in hydrogen ion concentration into the water bodies, which reacts with the calcium which are in the shells of corals, and then cause carbonic acid, which is the acid we are talking about. And this one affects the marine life. The other one is the pollution. We all know that nowadays you see like the ocean is most of the plastic wastes, they are going to the ocean, the marine litter, affecting the corals. Destruction fishing practices, like the use of explosives and dynamites, affect the corals. Increase in coral bleaching and mortality. This is due to global warming, which affect the marine life. And also changes in ecosystem services to people, the food security, issues of overfishing. It can be caused by illegal fishing practices as well. Impact of livelihood and social economic of fishers, coastal communities, coastal erosion risk, and so on. And why this study I chosen Mafia. Mafia is an island adjacent to Dar es Salaam, is 120 kilometers southeast of Dar es Salaam city. And it is richest in marine biodiversity. It's one of the districts which is rich in marine biodiversity in Tanzania. It has a larger marine park area covering 407 kilometers square of land and 567 kilometers square of water. It has a population of 66 people. Objective of this study. Let's look on the research questions. We are looking at the major ecosystem benefit provided by coral reefs to the coastal communities. As we can see, like the island, 90% of people are relying on fishing and tourism activities. So we are looking if they know the major ecosystem benefit offered by the reefs. And the other question was how do the component of vulnerability influence the livelihood of coral reef resource dependent? And the others is what are the measures might be taken to reduce vulnerability of coastal communities. Here we are looking at the alternative livelihood. If they understand, if all the corals will be depleted, how are they going to survive? Do they think of any other alternative activities in their life? And the findings were, of course, we did semi-structured interviews where we interviewed like community leaders in all areas of the island and the institutions which are stake, key institutions which are stake in marine resources. And the major benefit communities obtained from coral reef in Mafia Island, 100% say that nursery and feeding and breeding grounds for fish and other marine organisms. 90% say that people are getting building material out of coral. They mine corals, you know, they look like stones, so people take them and go to build their houses. Coastal protection, others say that coastal protection. Sorry, doesn't go. Yes, we are there. I like to present with pictures. So 60% they said that coastal protection, we all know that coral reefs break the waves which affect, of which if they wouldn't be there, it would cause erosion in the coastal areas. 50% was tourism. They know that the benefit they are getting there is tourism. We know that we have ships which cruise in the coral reef areas. As we know, it's marine park. And food security, they get fish out of it. And the official institution perception, they say that, of course, 100% they say fishing and aquaculture. And others say that coastal protection, carbon sequestration, they give employment, as we say that there is tourism, and research, and revenue. Okay. When we go to changes in availability of reef resource, the percentage of respondents who mentioned that reasons for changing in availability of reef resources, 70% they say that climate change. Climate change is causing them is affecting the availability of reef resources. And 60% they said destructive fishing practices. As we know that people like to go around the corals to fish because they know that there are fish stocks. Others say that coordination and inadequate fund for monitoring is also affecting the availability of resources, pollution, and political interference. Activities with highest economic value, the perception was fishing, crop farming, tourism, restaurant or seaweed farming, and livestock keeping. And also reasons for that cause changes in activities with highest economic value in the past 2 years was destructive fishing practices, climate change, strict conservation rules, more people in fishing, and destruction of reefs. Now, when we come to alternative livelihood, how these people perceive, what are the alternative livelihood? Most of the, like 90% of the respondents said agriculture. They say like, if the corals are going to be threatened and depleted, it means they will shift into crop farming, like the pictures you have seen. And 70%, they say that they will shift into small business, like food vendors, fruit vendors, and so on. And 60%, they will say that livestock keeping will be the alternative livelihood. When we go to recommendation, one of them was to channel capital to improve education so that communities are better equipped to take on alternative jobs, and to raise awareness on climate change so that they will be ready for adaptation, to adapt to that situation, and create such structures to offer community access to credit, like microfinance, circles, and so on. Engage local people in decision making to ensure that local needs are addressed. And in conclusion, therefore, respondents' perception consider that reef resources in Mafia Island are declining. Therefore, conservation is very important while preparing for the worst by diversifying into alternative livelihood. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just as the moderator, Professor, introduced me, my name is Regan Mugume. I work at the Economic Policy Research Center based in Makerere University, Uganda. I'm here to make a presentation that I did with my colleague, Enoch Bulime, who was at that time working with the center but left for his PhD at Kansas State University, United States. Our study is entitled, Does Financial Development Matter for Renewable Energy Transition? And we are looking at the region of Sub-Saharan Africa. Our presentation outline is as follows. We present the motivation, what inspired us to look at financial development and renewable energy transition. We will briefly present the data and sources, the approach, the results, and the conclusion and recommendation. Now, about 75% of the people that don't have access to electricity globally come from Sub-Saharan Africa. It's really common knowledge to all of us that Africa still struggles with electricity deficit. Now we see, to delve deep, that the region is also a home to 20 countries with the lowest electrification rates. But also, if you are to look at how much renewable vis-a-vis non-renewable energy that we use, we look at most of our electricity sources are non-renewable. For example, biofuels account for 43%, oil 23%, natural gas 16%. So even the little that we have is not clean. So the low clean energy usage actually has, of course, an implication on our environment. Talk about issues of pollution, our mothers cooking using charcoal. That's why probably the cancer rates are increasing. You know, pollution-related deaths, high costs of energy for farms. And also it undermines service delivery. For example, when our children at school do not have electricity, they have limited time of study. And also in our hospitals, when there is no energy, people die because probably there are blackouts from where I come out. We are degrading the environment as the SDG articulate. Now, you realize that for us to transition from non-renewable to renewable, we have to have a robust financial sector. And this financial sector has to be efficient, it has to be affordable, it has to be deep to reach the people down at the grassroots, and it has to be profitable. Now, what does it really matter? Because at times there are countries where financial development, which includes financial efficiency, financial inclusion, having the right products out there, but these products are working for non-renewable energy. You have a lot of banks investing in oils instead of promoting renewable energy transition, ladies and gentlemen. Now, our study looked at the nexus, the link between the two, financial development and renewable energy. To what extent does financial development, does the development of banking institutions, financial markets, to what extent are they fostering renewable energy transition? Now we see, to look at the financial markets, for financial development, which involves financial institutions and financial markets in sub-Saharan Africa, these two components are really not doing well, especially for financial markets. Our financial markets are not properly regulated. They are underdeveloped. Most of our MSMEs in renewable energy do not know about these things. They are poorly regulated. They do not promote financial access. They don't, for example, advance loans to MSMEs. And it has an implication. A research question, therefore, questions are as follows. So we looked at how financial development affects renewable energy in sub-Saharan Africa. We also looked at how does financial development vary across low-income countries and middle-income. For example, low-income country probably like DRC and a middle-income country like Kenya. So we want to see, does the financial development actually vary, the impact, does it vary across low income? As you go high, as you get money as a country, as you develop, do you tend to invest more in energy transition, or you put money in the biofuels? And then we also looked at what components of financial development spark clean energy transition. In the interest of time, I will even skip this because we used a sample of 19 countries, because this was a good sample because it looked at so many countries, both middle income and low income. And we used data from IMF, and it had financial indicators. We used some components from the World Bank. Now, these are just the descriptive statistics. Renewable energy this was the period of analysis from 2000 to 2019. Renewable energy, you see, it increased from about the mean, I'm looking at the mean, from about 9.6. This is renewable energy consumption, which is captured by the World Bank. It's about 9.6 9.16 to 12.3, which means that there's that transition that is happening. Then financial development, which is an index developed by the IMF, it also increased from 0.13 to 0.16. Let me delve deep into the results. Now, we ran a model. This is an econometric model. And we looked at the financial development. These are different models. We assumed different scenarios. And we found that by trying by simulating the different scenarios, we found that financial development actually has an impact on, the first one is a full sample, where we had all the countries. The second one is the low-income countries. So we find that it is significantly positively related to renewable energy. Financial development actually promotes renewable energy transition. But what is interesting in the third model there is that in the middle-income countries like Kenya, financial development is not necessarily leading to renewable energy transition. Whereas it's very interesting that whereas the very poor countries seem to be transitioning to renewable energy, as your income increases, then probably your banks tend to go to using biofuels. So the higher you go, the less the transition. Now we looked at, there's what we call indigeneity in econometrics, and we still controlled for indigeneity, and we found the same kind of results. That actually, in the middle income, column 4, the middle income countries like Kenya, South Africa, they are still in processing of coal, for example, for South Africa. And interestingly, countries that are poor, you'll find like households are using solar panels. So it makes a lot of sense because there has been that kind of solar transition. So the higher you go, then the less you transition, which is a paradox that we have to address as policymakers. And so that is basically the econometric results. But also we found that, interestingly, when you look at where you see debt, not working. Where you see debt, excuse me. Kindly let me move. Let me move it myself. Where you see debt, you see that middle-income countries like Kenya, when they borrowed money from the World Bank or the IMF, that money is helping them to transition. Now, which is different from the low-income countries in the column 5 there. This implies, now this points to the efficiency of countries to transition their loans, to use their loans to transition into renewable energy. Probably this points to issues of accountability, corruption. For example, you find middle-income countries are more efficient in using their loans to be able to transition to renewable energy. That is a very interesting finding. And now what insights in conclusion do we get? That our study shows that renewable energy transition is associated with financial development only in low-income countries, which we have to interrogate and know why. And that means when you have more financial products, when you have digital financial inclusion, when you have bonds, green bonds, these seem to be working, sorry, not green bonds, the general bonds seem to be working for the non-renewable energy compared to renewable energy. Now, second, we find that financial institutions, rather than financial markets, in my model, I disaggregated the two. That financial institutions, rather than financial markets, are related to renewable energy. And that is really self-explanatory. Because our financial markets here are not popular, they are not known by many MSMEs, they are not working for the people at the grassroots. So which means we have to work on this. Financial institutions like banks, like SACCOs, seem to be related to renewable energy transition. But also, thirdly, that public debt in middle-income countries seems to be working for renewable energy transition. And why? It seems efficiently transform these loans into renewable energy transition. So what do we recommend? We recommend development of financial markets to support renewable energy transition. In other countries, like the developed countries, their financial markets are very developed. They have green bonds. A few countries in Africa, like I think South Africa, Kenya, and Namibia, have tried to have like a pilot of green bonds and carbon pricing mechanisms, but we don't see that in very low-income countries. As I conclude, we need to strengthen, and of course here, still on the first point, we need to develop more innovative products that will promote renewable energy transition. So the issue of green bonds and other instruments is very critical to be dissipated down at the grassroots. Let people know them, let MSMEs know them, because at the end of it all, they are the ones that finance our economy. Second last, strengthen the regulatory framework for financial institutions and MSMEs dealing in renewable energy. For us to promote renewable energy transition, the MSMEs have to be part and parcel of our agenda. MSMEs have to embrace, for example, solar energy. They have to be financed. They have to get subsidies so that they can shift from generators to solar panels and the like. And lastly, we need more concessionally lending amid the strong accountability structures, especially in the low-income countries. And this is a scenario where you find very poor countries, yes, give them climate-smart financing, but they will not use it to transform from non-renewable to renewable energy. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to present work that is in progress. So you will not see the results, but the intentions. The research is about climate change and natural resources in fragile ecosystem. And the title of the research is Climate Change-Induced Mobility, Conflict, and Transformation of Livelihood and Identity among Pastoralist Communities in Northern Kenya, Opportunities for Mitigation and Adaptation. So as I said, this is still work in progress, so I'll just present our intentions and our expectations. So very many of the presenters right from yesterday have clearly indicated that climate change is one of serious challenges that we are facing during our current time and is projected to actually become not taken. In Kenya, we already experienced the serious impacts of climate change, and particularly it is more serious among communities living in rural areas and where they are facing serious environmental challenges and also diminishing natural resources. Our area of focus is northern Kenya. I know several studies have been done, but of course, there have been varied results, and that has actually informed our study. that there is still that allowance for carrying out more studies. The region is generally drought prone and of course is likely to be affected more by the impacts of climate change. According to Bedalian and Ogutu, although pastoralism has evolved to manage the harsh climatic conditions through using mobility and risk spreading strategies, however, climate change is likely to complicate and make it more, maybe more serious, so that they will not be able to easily adopt. As a result, we are likely to see numerous changes in livelihood, which will occur, and it's also expected that climate change will impact on migration patterns. The mobility that pastoralists have been using to adapt may be complicated because of that. It's already complicated, but it's going to become worse. At the same time, climate change exacerbated the stresses on already fragile ecosystems, and therefore is likely to increase competition for natural resources, which is the commonly invoked causes for conflicts. However, we find that there have been uncertainty on the likely directions or pathways that is going to or is linking climate change, migration, and conflict. And also, there is the complex nexus between climate change, pastoral mobility, transformation of livelihood, and identity, which has not been well understood. And this invoked us to think about doing more research. And therefore, the main objective of this research or the project is to explore how climate change is influencing or distorting the movement patterns of the pastoralists, causing conflicts, practices, livelihood, and identities among the pastoralist communities in northern Kenya. So the focus will be not only on people, but on the resources, practices, and also how the migration that is arising from the stresses of climate change contributes to creating more conflict and transformation of livelihood and identities. So we are also going to evaluate the salient action plans that have been taken by government, by the individuals, and other international agencies that are found there in trying to create a situation where climate change can be mitigated or the communities can adopt, and also building peace in order to bring about sustainable development. So our objectives are running across what I've already been talking about, how climate change is influencing the mobility patterns and trends. We are also going to look at the livelihoods and also changes or transformation of identities among these pastoralists, because as there is competition and changes in resource availability, these people who have been relying on livestock are likely to change not only their livelihood, but also their cultural identities are likely to transform. We are also going to examine the action plans that have been taken by the government, the people, and other agencies. So the significance will mainly to inform policy, so I don't need to go through that, but also to see how these transformation or changes in migration are likely to create more conflict in that fragile environment. What gaps did we identify as we try to conceptualize this research? While there is growing literature that have sought to address the global economic system in responding to climate change, there is little attention that has been given to subjudicated livelihood, such as those of pastoralism. At the same time, although, as I've stated earlier, pastoralists use mobility to adopt, but climate change is likely to distort this and even the cultural ways. And therefore, the question that arises is what kind of mobility trends are going to emerge and reproduced, and how climate change will influence all this and how they are being translated by these communities. So we also talk about the identity transformation, because people who have relied on livestock resources and this has formed their cultural identities are likely to change. So those are some of the gaps. Our study will be guided by two theories: environmental scarcity theory and vulnerability framework. So I'll go through very fast methods. We are going to triangulate both qualitative and quantitative, and we'll use several tools for data collections that we have highlighted there so that we can get more information, and also use GIS in order to look at the changes in patterns of migration. And therefore, our analysis will both be quantitative and qualitative. ArcGIS will be used to analyze the spatial changes. We are going to collect information about those changes before climate change became that serious, and over the years, and how livelihood have been transforming. We're going to use in-depth interviews, among others. We are also going to look at the identity transformation and also map out the opportunities that exist. So I think briefly, that is how or what we have conceptualized to undertake. This study is in response to a call by the African Center at the University of Beirut in Germany. So we are still working on it, but this is how we have designed our study. So I don't want to go beyond that. Thank you for listening.
All right, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. All right, thank you so much. All protocol observed. I don't know if my slides are up yet. I just want to thank all the presenters who've gone ahead of me. I think they have built momentum for what I'll be looking at today. I'll be looking at closing the climate financing gap with a specific focus on private insurance. And I thank my colleague also who has just presented right before me and has really built a good case for financial institutions, of which insurance falls right there. Thank you very much. All right, from all the discussions we've had from the beginning of this conference, I think we can agree that climate action will actually rise or fall on financing. So my study is organized, as you can see. I will be doing an introduction and just painting a picture of what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa in regard to climate financing. I'll also look at the financing gaps in sub-Saharan Africa, and then what promise that does private insurance have in climate action, and then the challenges and way forward as a policy. All right. insurance is really the missing link in disaster risk management in sub-Saharan Africa. Further, through underwriting, insurance can signal and incentivize abatement in terms of pollution and also promote decarbonization. Right now, many organizations are having ESG policies in their day-to-day running, and as it gains momentum, insurance can provide incentives that would support and promote green transitions in organization. I was happy to hear from Basigo and the work they are doing in terms of bringing in clean energy. However, some of the challenges they could be facing, and I think it was clear, it's that it's a very expensive endeavor. So insurance can come in and support even through underwriting to make it cheaper for them to even access insurance services. Capital flows from insurance are also very promising. If we can look at the investments around insurance industry and specifically the pension and asset base. In sub-Saharan Africa, the asset base is growing rapidly, and that can be used and diverted in investments in green and blue bonds. As my colleague rightfully mentioned, these are very much underdeveloped in sub-Saharan Africa, yet it is a pathway to green transition. Also, insurance, and I think this will be my last point in terms of what insurance contributes, is that it provides risk analytics and advice on green transition. And this is also very important within the ESG framework for companies. So what are the challenges and why is it not working? In addition to what my colleague Mugune just mentioned, insurance uptake is very low in sub-Saharan Africa. It could be a perception issue, as was raised earlier yesterday. Knowledge and capacity building is needed for us to be able, as sub-Saharan Africa, to take advantage of what insurance can do in climate change mitigation and adaptation. Also, the products are underdeveloped for private insurers, and there is also weak regulatory financial frameworks within the industry. So what are some of the recommendations as policy actions or priority areas? Private insurance has shown a willingness to participate and invest in adaptation, but let me highlight one thing that I think will carry the day. We need to support de-risking of private investment in order to support green investment. Perhaps that could be the reason why middle-income countries are not able to translate their financial development to actual renewable energy, because there is no de-risking when it comes to green investment. And this can be done through policy, where the rules of game are very clear and the legal frameworks are provided for, so that developers and investors can take part in green projects. Also, financial de-risking is very important to deploy measures that would help with the risks associated with green investments. So we would call upon the development finance institutions, the MDBs, to assist in developing instruments, either debt and equity instruments, creating third-party risk or transferring risk to third parties so that there are bankable pipelines for green investment. So as a parting shot, for the private investors, as you bring them to board to communicate and continue with this conversation, it is important to note that private investors will not invest because, or make an investment because it's green. They will only deliver these kind of investments when they are returned to those investments. So thank you so much for listening to me. Asanteni.
Thank you very much, presenters. Brigadier, you really didn't give them enough time. There was some very rich material that those presenters were trying to present, but not enough time. But we'll come to that. Before I call upon you, Professor Okara, just sort of let's wrap our minds around this, because there were some very fundamental issues that came up. Salema, Mafia Island, people whose lives are being fundamentally disrupted, partly because of poor fishing practices, but also the destruction of coral reefs. So the question is, what alternative sources of livelihood can be developed? And two, how can you protect further degradation? Two, Mugume, financial development. How does financial development impact energy transition? I thought a fantastic question, which has been built upon a little bit by Godwill, but I was surprised at your conclusions. And I hope that, Professor Ogara, you are going to share some of those conclusions. I felt that the data that you presented to us was different from the conclusions you are drawing, but I'm curious and interested to hear your reactions to that. Then the very interesting study that Dr. Okaka presented that is underway. And for me, as you are speaking, Dr. Okaka, my question was, listening to Mr. Doron from Israel yesterday, what happened when Israel was threatened with their existence because of the fragile ecosystem they live in, very similar to your study site, they saw that as an opportunity. So how do we make sure that these challenges, even as we confront them, become opportunities for transformation and new growth, as opposed to sort of just saying this is happening, it is disastrous, and we are in trouble? Again, a question for you to guide us through, Professor Ogara. And then the question of private insurance. I tried to challenge Godwin yesterday about livestock insurance in this country, which was touted very highly as the way to go forward. And to what extent does livestock insurance that has been under implementation for at least 5 years, how did that serve the pastoral communities in the last 3 consecutive drought seasons that we had? So, going back to what Professor Monene reminded us, let's get down to the practicalities and the realities. Let's not just sort of make it academic important as it is. But having said so, Godwill, I do think you have a point in terms of going towards looking at what are the alternative sources of financing that we could explore further, insurance being one of them. But as we all know from the insurance sector, when it is an unpredictable event or catastrophic event, it's very difficult to attract private insurance. So how do you reconcile that? Professor Ogara, I do not want to preempt your remarks any further. Please come in and give us your expert reflections.
Good morning. My remarks will be a bit simple. They will be simple because you heard yesterday is that when we are handling issues like this, we must communicate in such a way that we bring the high-sounding issues in simplicity of language and down to consumption level. So, but one of the things I will also not do is to repeat the presentations, their contents, their conclusions, and that, because we needed to have followed that from the presentations. So, when we are dealing with this, I want to, what we are dealing with, this particular theme deals with sustainable development goals. We need to have understanding of what sustainable development goals are Why are they important? How do they relate to adaptation and mitigation actions and work around the world? And what can we do to make a difference? We have to address specific issues. So now the 17 interlinked global goals, they are meant to transform the world. They were actually meant to be blueprints to achieve a better and a more sustainable future. And this make it is international or global. So these SDGs, they provide guidance for addressing each of these goals. And then we know that the challenge we have is that across the globe, as I talked about, in small scale, in medium and large scale, the climate change impacts, create crisis. So they can only be addressed if we work in that cascaded manner. And this underpins the need and essence of the forthcoming significant activities, the African Climate Change Conference in Nairobi, and the UNFCCC COP28 in Dubai. Now, significant here is the revision of the National Climate Change Action Plans. I'm addressing the conference, the workshop, and why are we holding it? And therefore, we need to, we have got to consider, as we are going to discuss and craft the national determined contributions. Therefore, we need to look at the implementation and gaps, what the challenges, the hurdles are. But when we look at this, we look at the big picture. When we look at Kenya, we'll look at our region, we will look at the continent. So we are then reflecting and baseline on the implementation period, the intervening period between that one, the last time and this time. But of course also we base on the Paris Agreement. I'm looking at these presentations in very simple sentences in the lens of problem solving. So, let me start with the presentation of Godwin Mongare. Like I said, the presentation in its content, in its objectives, in its conclusions have been presented. But what comes out is that climate change risk insurance is indeed significant in compensating vulnerable communities on destruction of their lives and livelihoods by extreme climate change events, which have been highlighted. However, the following issues need to be considered: the socio-economic potential of the country's populations to invest in insurance, then the trust, the transparency, accountability, that their monies are safe by relevant insurance companies, and that it will be timely paid back in the event of climate change emergency impacts on both their lives and livelihood assets. So, that is the terminology the presenter used was de-risking. These are the areas that we need to pay. What is significant here is that variation in income capabilities of the populations, thus diverse population disaggregations, lead to affordability of insurance services. The capacity of insurance companies to cover any particular local community from climate risks at the same time do not make losses. We were told that climate change affects the entire SDG framework. At the same time, we have global tightening of economic support, actions, and these are the key challenges in this area. This paper discusses what the adaptation needs and presents that they were identified. My question is, how are these adaptation needs identified. When you are dealing with a particular subject matter and you want to be able to give a recommendation for the next action, normally we have to do very clear scoping and systematic analysis. And when you do scoping and systematic analysis, then in a very systematic order you provide the elements of that analysis. And that elements will range from the intervening period, what was the project, what were the projects, how were they funded, who funded them, what were the challenges in the implementation, and therefore what were the gaps. So in the presentation, irrespective of the title, for me, that needs to come out very well before you start talking about the gaps. And this applies to all the presentations. So we need to upscale our statements and support them with specific science-based statements. When you come to review, it is important to consider using specific adaptation frameworks, and these are published. When you are presenting like this, you need to tell us that you subjected your analysis to a specific adaptation framework. The adaptation frameworks, they are about 11 or 12, and if you apply one of them, and that will get you out. But nevertheless, I want to pose that this particular presentation, and I said I'm looking at these presentations in the lens of the objective of these meetings prior to the two actions, two events that are coming. So I want to state that this paper, in my view, in its contribution, addresses Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 13, Climate Change Action, Target 13.1, Fund Mobilization and Implementation of Climate Change Commitments. So, all else, what has been said, going into their analysis, whatever it is, for purposes of this action, we'll have to look at them in that for the financial development, and therefore, how developed countries are going to argue, how developed countries, developing and emerging countries, are going to craft their contributions, nationally determined contributions, will depend on these understandings, and it will bring outcomes that we need for the next phase of dispensation. I think that's all I wanted to say about that first paper, and that is by Mongare. Then we have the second one, is vulnerable community, the one on Julius Edwards. For me, this focus area is vulnerable communities. Vulnerable communities. And my remarks is that the author's work basically, this work touches on educating coastal communities on sustainable development options in one of the viable forward steps to diversifying from heavily relying on reef resources which are under climate challenges. Diversification options such as farming and all others which were mentioned there, including tourism activities, although they help alleviate pressure on marine habitats, these too are under direct and indirect climate change impacts. So the way forward is to ensure socioeconomic activities of the coastal communities, strengthen corporate services, symbiotic interlinkages between livelihood and marine resources, a sustainable harvest, and build back system to prevent degradation of the resources, improving sustainable alternative livelihood assets, improvement on tourism alone yield several interrelated sets of income options, which we have seen. They are the souvenir, the sea, the land transport business, hospitality industries, conservation actions. In futuristic manner, there is need to enhance joint conservation and management at community level, government, conservancy organization of marine resources, including executing regulations. As I did with the first one, I want to believe that this communication is actually aligned to SDG 14, aquatic ecosystem, and 13, target 13.3, improving education, awareness raising, human capacity on climate change, mitigation and adaptation, and its indicator, SDG 13.3.1, education for sustainable development. We must remain focused in what we are saying, in what we are doing. I did not set out to review the papers, but I listened to see how we can capture issues in the framework of events and issues. So, the next presentation was by Okaka Frederick. Which I'm looking at. Okaka Frederick, this is a research proposal. It is futuristic, yeah. It is futuristic, therefore. But in his presentation, climate change, induced mobility and conflicts over land and water resources have been rampant in arid and semi-arid regions. Now, community engagement on other local options on livelihood resources is one of the ways to reduce concentration on pastoralism only. Now, climate change financing, investment on water harvesting and storage system here in Kenya has been piloted in counties, under county climate change fund in 5 counties of Isiolo, Makueni, and Kitui, and Garissa. But these were channeled to construction and rehabilitation of earth and sand dams and other water harvesting and storage systems and sanitation facilities. Now, such climate resilient investments resulted to improved access to clean water for household, micro irrigation, livestock use, and reduced community conflicts of water resources. We also have a World Bank financed led climate action, FLLOC FLOCA, a program in Kenya, and its contribution to the county climate fund of 47 counties. When you look at this communication, that is, it's to strengthen national and county government capabilities to handle climate change risks and to empower local communities to identify climate change impacts affecting them and developing a county climate change action plan. We are again looking at the intervening period. We are baselining with Paris. We are looking at the last COP. And then we are actually now considering that is it, what we will need to do. We will strengthen national and county government capabilities, I've said, to handle climate change. In the process, empower local communities to identify climate change impacts affecting them and developing a county climate change action plan. This kind of action will help us contribute to the direction we want to go, how we are going to engage beyond this point in the 2 activities. Thank you. So I align this to the research, this research proposal if addressed, the SDG 13, target 13.1, strengthening resilience, adaptive capacity to climate, and also partly with SDG 16, peace and justice. So I think basically that is how I've looked at the presentations, and even including the last one, which I have aligned to its contribution to SDG 7, affordable clean energy. That's the one of Mugune. and SDG 13, Climate Change Action, Target 13.2, in integrating climate change measures into national policies, strategies, and planning. And Indicator 13.2.1, considering and reducing total greenhouse gas emissions. I will not say much more, but I only want to say in conclusion that there are three key issues here. And I say again, we have to think on what we want to do with this conference, what we want to do with this workshop. We need to consider in conclusion holistic action, argue for an integrated multi-sectoral approach that categorizes the interdependencies between climate action and sustainable development. We need to look at regional collaborations, advocate for enhanced regional cooperation among Eastern African nations to share knowledge, resources, and strategies. And at global level, we want to call for increased support from global partners in terms of financing, technology transfer, and capacity building. This we will do when we have systematically, against each target, identified gaps. And these gaps are based, and I said, if you do your scoping and systematic analysis, then you will have identified key elements of any project implementation, and that will lead you to gaps, and those gaps you can talk about as we head to the crafting of nationally determined contribution. So, in anticipation of conferences, it is essential to harness the synergy between scholarly research and policy discussions only by bridging the gap between academia and policy, and this can ensure that the global response to climate change is both informed and effective, and particularly for the unique challenges faced. And I keep talking about gaps, because that is where the rubber meets the road. And if we are not coming out that, then I don't know what else we can be able to craft. We are able to contribute, therefore, to the crafting of the nationally determined contribution. And I've said gap analysis using adaptation frameworks and published adaptation frameworks, because you are dealing with academic issues. You are dealing with analysis that you want us to refer to and use against other participants nationally and globally. So your point of reference must be those that are referable. And Mike Lonthing, I just want to quote Colonel Musa Noor yesterday. He said, if you apply strategies of yesterday, then you kill strategies of tomorrow. So if we want to deal with tomorrow, we can use the strategies of yesterday to assist us build into strategies of tomorrow. So whatever has been done, if properly scoped and systematically analyzed, they have the strategies of yesterday, and they'll give us strategies of tomorrow. That is where we are going. Whether it was his own or whether he quoted it from somewhere else, but I've related that statement to him. I also want to put another one. Somebody yesterday said that God works in mysterious ways. But human beings must support God's mysterious ways to create peace, comfort, and prosperity for sustainable future and sustainable development. Whenever I want to do something and I'm working with colleagues or in a place, as you start working, somebody tells me, apply the theory of change. Sometimes I sit back and say, why does he come? And immediately he tells me. So to me, like, the theory of change has become a buzzword. Sometimes I keep quiet, sometimes I watch, but I give it consideration. I want to pause here that climate change is a moving target. And as we move on, those who will be handling these issues, please consider activity theory. I would like to stop here. Thank you. I hope I've been relevant to the purpose and the presentation.
You've given us a lot of food for thought, Professor Ogara. Let's give a hand to the presenters. Because in essence, the discussion over the last hour and a bit goes to the heart of this conference. We are facing existential threat. Our communities are in grave danger of having their livelihoods destroyed. How do we respond? And as Godio said, the climate action is going to stand or fall on financing. So what financial architecture, what financial instruments are going to be responsive to the felt needs of our communities? So time is not on our side. They have done a very good job to discuss some very complex issues. I'll just take 2 comments because it will be unfair not to do so, even though we are running behind a schedule before we finish this session. Two quick comments. Comments, questions? I'll take one from that side. I'm looking for a lady. Okay, I'll not discriminate. Okay, 2, and then is there a lady who wants to speak? 2 first.
Thank you very much. My name is Brian Moshema. I'll have one comment, or rather, question to Dr. Mongare with regards to insurance. Insurance has been fronted as a preemptive solution as opposed to reactionary, because before we've been reacting to crises that affect our societies. And she talked of perception that is probably leading to the low uptake of insurance products. I don't know, what does she think about the trust issue of these insurance products? Because we have problems of, now these are concepts like basis risk, the moral hazard. All these contribute to the low uptake. So we have perception on one side. How do we entrench trust for these products and for insurance entirely? Because agricultural insurance is not like your normal indemnity insurance, the one for motor vehicle insurance. I hope my question is well put. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take the questions first. As you think about just how do you operationalize that, given the reality of the insurance market? My friend there with the fear.
I am representing a lady.
You're representing yourself. We'll look for a lady.
Good morning. My name is Kano Rita, Chairman Kenya Fishery Service. I have a question for my brother from Tanzania. I don't know if I can tell what his name. Coral reefs provide important ecosystem for life underwater. According to your presentation, the existence of coral reefs is threatened by human activity. In your research, what did you identify to be put in place to protect, conserve coral reefs in Murphy Island? The second question is to the same presenter. IUU fishing, that is illegal, interrupted, and unreported, unregulated fishing, contributes to overfishing and using of substandard gadgets for fishing, including fishing nets. What did you identify in your research as action plan to prevent, deter, and eliminate IUU in Murphy Island? The third one is about the pastoralist, Dr. Kaka. Pastoralists have been subject of hostile climate, hostile environment, and on top of that, climatical change, which has just come up to add injury to the salt to the injury. You have said about alternative livelihood. What did you identify your research as alternative livelihood for the pastoralists in northern Kenya? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was 3 questions in one, which is fine. They are all relevant questions. Unless there is a lady. What has happened to the ladies today? Unless there is a lady, we'll take those 2 interventions and get a response before we close this.
All right, thank you very much for. Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you so much, Brian, for your question. And thank you, sir, for your review of our papers. We will look into, and I will look into the scope and attempt to give a systematic analysis on the gap that I am addressing when it comes to insurance and its ability to help in climate action. In regard to what Brian has asked and the low uptake of insurance in sub-Saharan Africa, yes, I did posit that there is an issue of perception and perhaps really making it difficult for people to take up insurance. And that's why I proposed a need for capacity building and knowledge in terms of educating the entire community on climate risk being not as something that would just happen, but actually will happen, and therefore insurance plays a key role in helping mitigate the recovery process, preparedness, and the entire disaster risk management framework. Now, there has been trust issues, and I acknowledge that in my paper, that these trust issues can be solved using an open source data model, where collaboration is allowed, and I like what our colleagues at Alliance Bioversity have tried to do in providing such an open source model or tool that can be accessed and enable people to map out risks and understand the solutions that are available. In terms of regulations, we have the IRA that watches over the payouts, and I believe they have been consistent, deregistering insurance companies that do not adhere to the contracts that they make with individuals. I hope that answers. Okay.
Salema, a quick response.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your question. If I got it well, you asked that from my study, what did I came up with to protect these degraded coral reefs. One of the best idea I came up with is to educate these communities to understand the benefits they get from the coral reefs. So through education, the other thing is to enforce on the environmental laws and regulation which are in place to make sure that these people will not distract the coral reefs for their survival. And as well as to formulate the bylaws, which is a participatory approach with these communities so that they ensure that these coral reefs are protected for their livelihood for this generation and the coming generation. Thank you.
Thank you. The other questions about how to reduce illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, IUU, but maybe that can be discussed over coffee. I hope also that over coffee and lunch break, we can also look at the conclusions by Mugume. I kind of wasn't quite sure that I agree with you that middle-income countries in Africa are not harnessing financial instruments. South Africa may not be doing fast enough transition because they have coal. So the issue is, how do you help them to use coal in a cleaner way? So we need to sort of be a bit more nuanced in some of the conclusions we are drawing from the data. But clearly, this is a discussion that merits more time than we have. I want to thank all of you for your audience. I want to thank the presenters for very thought-provoking interventions. I want to thank you, Professor Ogara, for reminding us to remain relevant and to remain within the existing frameworks, because we're only going to develop solutions if we are also aware and conscious of the frameworks within which these global discussions are taking place as our take-off point. So with those many remarks, I thank all of you. Let's give everybody a big, big clap for work very well done. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give the team another round of clap. Thank you. It is time for health break, and tea is available. So our next session begins at exactly 10:25. So please, let's have our health break. And then when we come back, Professor Grace Njoroge will take up the section on technology research and climate change. Thank you.